Hello, welcome to the series Missions and Psychology. Today we're going to be focusing on social psychology and how it can be used in missions. We're going to focus on using the tools of social psychology, the topics that social psychology deals with, and we're going to talk about some of the findings in social psychology that are useful for people that are either doing missions, working among people of other cultures, trying to lead them to Christ, or missiologists who are studying missions and how to best make disciples out of people. First of all, let's answer the question, what is social psychology? Or even more basically, what is psychology? Now, psychology can be defined as the scientific study of the behaviors, thoughts, and feelings of people. When you think about it, that's pretty much all that humans do. They have behavior, they do things, but they also have thoughts and they have feelings. And psychology is looking at how behaviors, thoughts, and feelings relate to one another. Now, social psychology includes a social aspect of how behaviors, thoughts, and feelings relate to each other. It studies how one individual is influenced by other individuals. And that might include at the actual presence of individuals, but it might include individuals who are not present or who are just imagined, who aren't even real there, how thinking about other people will influence our behaviors. So an example of that would be a phenomena that social psychologists have identified as evaluation apprehension. Evaluation apprehension is a phenomena that happens all the time in many different cultures. It's the idea that when people think they're going to be evaluated and they risk being evaluated negatively, their level of apprehension, their anxiety level goes up. And so, because feeling anxious, feeling evaluated is not a very pleasurable feeling, people tend to avoid these situations where they'll be evaluated negatively. Now, this has a lot of applications for missions. Anybody that's trying to share the gospel with somebody, anytime that people feel evaluated, they are going to want to move away from that situation. For example, if somebody goes to a church for some reason and they're made to stand up and introduce themselves to each other, there's a good chance they're going to feel like they're going to be evaluated, and they might risk being evaluated negatively, especially if the people aren't familiar with them or if the people seem different to them than their own people. And so evaluation apprehension is really something that we want to avoid. We want the only stumbling block to be the gospel, the cross of Christ. We don't want any other form of evaluation to be a stumbling block. So that's an example of something that social studies, that social psychology studies. There's tons of other phenomena that they study, but I just wanted to present that one as an example. Now, social psychology can be distinguished from other types of psychology. Probably you're most familiar with clinical psychology. Clinical psychology is the idea of a psychologist or a therapist helping other people with problems. Clinical psychology focuses on problematic behaviors, problematic thoughts, and problematic feelings, whereas social psychology just looks at people's behaviors, thoughts, and feelings in general. Whereas clinical psychology is the study of people with problems, social psychology is the study of everybody, the whole range of people. Social psychology can also be distinguished from developmental psychology, which focuses on the change of behaviors, thoughts, and feelings throughout the lifespan. For example, how is a 3-month-old baby different than a 6-month-old baby? How is a 4-year-old different than an 8-year-old? How are teenagers different from adults? How are young adults differ from older adults? How do their behaviors, thoughts, and feelings change throughout the lifespan? Social psychology simply tends to focus on humans in general, which typically means adults more or less. Now, there's some close cousins of social psychology which are very important and is just as beneficial for missiology as social psychology is. One is organizational psychology. That the study of the behaviors, thoughts, and feelings of people in organizations, such as businesses or churches and so on. Since everything we do as Christians is in the context of a community, either the broader community that we're trying to reach for Christ or the Christian community that forms a church, we need to understand how humans tend to function in organizations. Another cousin is personality psychology. And personality psychology is how individuals differ in behavior, thoughts, and feelings from one another. Social psychology looks at how people act in general, whereas personality psychology looks at how one person is different from another. How do people, in what ways do individuals have different behaviors, different habitual thoughts, different habitual feelings? That's what's known as personality traits. And personality psychology focuses on how people differ from one another. Now, the topics studied in social psychology have a significant overlap with topics that interest missionaries and missiologists. First of all, one of the themes in social psychology that's studied quite a bit is the idea of connecting with other people. How are people attracted to each other? How do people form relationships? How do they function in groups? What makes groups form? What causes groups to function effectively if they have a common goal that they're trying to accomplish? What causes people to connect with each other, and how do they behave once they are connected? Now, obviously, that is something that's very important in missions. What attracts people to the gospel? What attracts people to the Christian community? How do people form relationships? What does it actually mean to have a loving relationship, to love someone? And how can we expect groups to function? How can we help groups to function well, especially young churches that are formed? Another common theme in social psychology is the idea of influencing each other. And this includes such topics as belief formation, persuasion, and conflict management. And these are things that missionaries are all very involved in. We want people to believe in Jesus Christ. How do people go about forming beliefs? What are their processes that occur in their mind that cause them to form beliefs? What can we do to persuade others? What are the actions that missionaries can do, that other Christians can do to persuade others to grow in faith in Jesus Christ? Are they ethical? Are they unethical? What are the right ways to do things? There's also the whole concept of conflict management. When you bring people together into a community, everybody has diverging interests. For sure, we're supposed to be focused on serving Jesus Christ, but in reality, a lot of times we can't separate our own desires from God's desires, and that can lead to a lot of conflicts. What can be done to manage conflicts? What are the tendencies in human behavior that can help us to better understand what to do to make groups the most functional and not suffer too much from conflict? Another group of topics studied in social psychology includes the idea of responding to others, which is quite broad. That might include the emotions that we feel. It might include the cultures that we form and how these cultures are different from one another. The topics of aggression, altruism, morality, spirituality, religiosity, all these things are formed and influenced by people responding to one another. Concepts of justice, concepts of cooperation, all of these topics are studied in social psychology, and they're at the root of what we want to teach people, that what's involved with the idea of becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ. Now, let's talk about the basic methodology. How does social psychology come to conclusions? And the answer to that is mainly through empirical studies. Empirical studies means that we get data and see if the data provides evidence for what we think might be true. Now, a lot of times when people think of psychology, they think of what's known as armchair psychology. what Freud and Jung would do. The epoch of armchair psychology is pretty much over. It's not completely over, it still occurs sometimes, but more and more we're moving away from theories based on introspection, case studies, rational thought. We're moving away from those type of theories, and we're developing theories based on actual data, things that can be empirically supported. So the basic approach now is we have an idea, we have a hypothesis, we want to find out if it's true. We collect quantitative data to test the hypotheses. Now, in order to do this, this requires certain things. One, it requires precise and reliable measures of behaviors, thoughts, and feelings. Unlike the physical sciences, where it's fairly easy to measure how fast a rock is falling, how long a stick is, how much something weighs, measuring behaviors, thoughts, and feelings has to be done indirectly. Sometimes it's done through physiological measurements, measuring changes in skin conductance, or sometimes it's done with measuring brain function. So often it's done through asking people questions like, what are your thoughts? How often do you perform this behavior? What are you feeling? Through survey research. And we have different tools for measuring how precise and how reliable these measures are. In fact, lots of modern psychology is coming up with better measures of behavior, thoughts, and feelings. So we measure the variables that are involved in our hypothesis, and we do a statistical analysis of the results. In statistics, or in psychology, we need statistics because there's such a broad range of human behaviors. We can never predict what one individual will do, but we can predict with statistics what people do on the average. And so we can make broad conclusions that apply to humans in general, or maybe even specific groups. We can't predict what any one person will do because there's too many variables involved, and people have free will. They can choose to do things that are not typical. So social psychology and psychology in general is concerned about figuring out what people do in general, what human nature is. Now let's look in detail at a classic example of a social psychology experiment. It's an old one, done in the 1960s by Leventhal, Singer, and Jones. And this was the time where vaccinations were developing, and lots of good vaccinations were being developed, and it was important to get people vaccinated to eradicate various diseases. So the research question that they tried to address was, what motivates people to be vaccinated? Because some people get vaccinated, some people didn't get vaccinated. Now their population were seniors at Yale University. Now seniors at Yale University are not representative of all human beings. There's lots of differences between seniors at Yale University and other populations. But if something's true for one population, we can kind of guess how true it would be in other situations, and then we can actually go and test to see how true it would be in other situations also. So in this study, they randomly assigned people to 3 conditions. Each group had maybe 20 or 30 people in it, and the first group of people, nothing happened with them. They got no information, they weren't given anything that the other groups were given, and they were the control group to see how many of them would just spontaneously get vaccinated without any of the things that the other groups are getting. The second group was called the information-only group. They listened to a presentation on the importance of vaccinations, and they were encouraged to get a vaccination. The third group received the information that the second group did, but they were also given a map leading them to the student health center and specific steps of what they needed to say and do to get a vaccine. So we had the control group that got no information, no plan of action. We had the information-only group that got information, and then we had a group that got both information and a plan of action. Well, the results were pretty clear. The control group, those who got no information about vaccines, none of them ended up getting vaccinated, which could be expected because nobody told them that they should get vaccinated. The information-only group, about 3%, one or two of the people got vaccinated, but the people that were given the information, the map, and the plan of action, 30% of those people got vaccinated. And this was statistically significant. It wasn't results that you could expect just by chance if the map and the plan of action did not have any effect. So we can see how something like this would be very relevant to any church context where we're trying to teach people. Just hoping that they learn about the Bible's not going to lead to people learning about the Bible. Just giving them information is not going to lead to further discipleship and growing into Jesus Christ, growing in Jesus Christ very much. But giving them information of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, plus a specific plan of action, is much more likely to lead people to go further in discipleship than simply giving them information. So this is an example of an experiment in social psychology that shows what aspects of human nature we need to pay attention to when we're trying to serve Jesus Christ in different situations. Now, what are some practical ideas for integrating more social psychology into missiology in general, into your mission service, into your ministry? I've got a few ideas. Some will appeal to you, some won't appeal to you. The first is simply reading. The first thing that I'd recommend to you is reading a social psychology textbook. Now, it's interesting. My wife and I were church planters in France for 17 years, doing evangelism, discipleship, church planting. And when we came back to America, one of the things that really stood out to me is how much textbooks have improved. They are very attractive, very readable, just packed full of information that's presented in a very usable form. So I encourage you to get a textbook on social psychology, read it, and to think through some of the issues that would be applicable to your ministry. Now, textbooks are kind of strange. A new edition comes out every 3 years or so, and the new editions are ridiculously expensive. They can cost $200 a social psychology book right now. But you don't need to get the most modern edition. If you get a textbook that's 2 editions old, for example, if the 6th edition has come out recently, you can get the 4th edition for maybe $2, $3, $4, $5 on Amazon. It's a lot cheaper, and the actual content from one edition to another doesn't change very much. Secondly, I encourage you to read journal articles, research articles about specific topics that people have been doing research. If you have access to a research library, that's great. That's a great way to get them, but most people don't if you're not associated with a university. But Google Scholar, and I've provided the address here for you, has lots of links to scholarly articles, peer-reviewed articles that are top quality, that you don't need to have library access to. A lot of times the authors of articles simply post their own articles on the web, and Google will search for those, and they'll provide a direct link to the PDF file for that article. So I encourage you to use Google Scholar to get access to research on so many topics that are applicable to missions. And then I also encourage you to read popular books on social study topics. Here's 3 examples of very popular books. Robert Cialdini's an expert in persuasion, and he's written a book called Influence, The Science of Persuasion, and it's a simple-to-read book on 6, 7, 8 different techniques that people use to persuade others of something. Some of them are ethical from a Christian perspective. Others are not ethical from a Christian perspective. And it's good to be aware of all the possibilities and to understand all the different ways tend to be persuaded. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is great. He's a social psychologist who won a Nobel Prize describing some of the mental errors that humans consistently make over and over again, the mental shortcuts people take, and how we can expect people to make incorrect conclusions in different situations. And a classic book is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, that describes how if we want to lead people, we can't do it just through giving them information. We need to influence their emotions as well. And that's a very useful book written from a social psychology perspective. A second way of integrating social psychology into missiology is to become more familiar with statistics and quantitative research methods. Now, if you're not very mathematically minded, that's not going to appeal to you too much. But with one semester of statistics, a good solid semester, you'll have a good ability to read the statistics section in research journal articles. Now, if you don't have a background in statistics, you can still read research articles, but you'll have a tendency to want to skip the section where they talk about statistics because most people don't have an intuitive understanding of statistics. Now, if you have 2 semesters of statistics and 1 semester of quantitative research methods, you'll generally have the ability to actually carry out research if you're working with other people and getting feedback from other researchers in order to design things that'll give you important, significant, and reliable results. So I encourage you to study statistics and quantitative research methods if you do have an interest in the mathematical side of things. And thirdly, and finally, an idea for integrating social psychology and missiology is to actually participate in research. If you're a missionary on the field, you might have a hunch about certain things that work in your context, in your mission field, and you might be wondering, is it really true? You could work with an experienced researcher to develop and test your hypotheses and see if it really is true. Now, there's a number of ways that missiological information is distributed. I've listed 3 missiological journals here. Missiology, which is an American journal, the Great Commission Research Journal that focuses on evangelism and church growth, and Dharma Deepika is a scholarly research journal in India that actually has a huge readership. A lot's happening in missions in India. And they're all interested in helping advance the field of missiology, and quantitative studies testing hypotheses are something that interests them. So I would encourage you to participate in research like that. And if you need a researcher to bounce ideas off or maybe to work together, feel free to contact me. My email address is real easy to find on the web, and I might be interested in working through the design of a research project for you. Well, the goal of this presentation has been to show you how social psychology, the field of social psychology, relates to missions work. And it's my prayer that you can use the tools, the concepts, the research that's been performed in social psychology and will continue to be performed in social psychology to the glory of God to help make disciples for Jesus Christ.